Whoever you are, wonderful, heart is broken and heart is fair.
It's great to see everyone today. Glad you're all able to make it out and join us in person. Welcome, season members. Welcome.
And good morning once again. I've chosen some opening words from Sue Ayer, titled Spirit of Life and Love. Spirit of life and love, we have gathered here in search of answers to hard questions. We have come in search of understanding and search of community. We have come in search of hope and healing. Let this be a place not only of searching, but of discovery. Let this place be a place of learning as well as wisdom. Let this be a place not only of meeting, but of connection. Let this be a place where healing fosters giving and hope fosters service. This is our prayer, that we may create here a circle of love, ever expanding, ever growing, as we seek to know you, the source of our being. Bless you. And I've chosen words for the challenge tonight. Nori Burris. Birth is a miracle of love and courage, bringing light to the world. Death is a loss of light, but no less an act of courage. For we are born from and return to mystery.
We have a stone ritual here at UUCT. So I'm going to place a stone for our joys, a stone for our sorrows, and a stone for our best intentions for the coming year.
I have to tell you, I'm used to bigger pulpits than this one. Just, as I'm going to tell you, I love to spread out my stuff. There's not much spreading out over here. So if I'm following a little bit, I'm not sure where I left to stop. Anyway, this will be the time when we got some thinking here. Probably come down here. I'd love to get down and sit on the floor with them, but I don't dare because it takes an hour and a half to get back up. Right here, maybe this week. If you watched any of the virtual services I've done, you notice that I've gravitated toward ESOP because, of course, that's in the public domain. And we've had some issues with copyright things and stuff like that. But I really like to use our Shel Silverstein poems for the story for all ages because it's fun for the kids and it's fun for the adults too. But anyway, there's some ESOP fables that work pretty well too. So here's one of them. This one's called The Travelers and the Sea. So two travelers were walking along the seashore. Far out, they saw something riding on the waves. Look, said one, a great ship rides in from distant lands, bearing rich treasures. The object they saw came ever nearer the shore. No, the other said, that is not a treasure ship, that is some fisherman's skiff with the day's catch, all savory fish all aboard. Still nearer came the object. The waves crashed up and down. It's a chest of gold, lost from some wreck, they cried. Both travelers rushed to the beach, but there they found nothing but a water-soaked log. So the moral of that one, don't let your hopes carry you away from reality. So that's the story. This meditation I've chosen this morning is from Ralph Waldo Emerson. It's a journal entered his. It's written after his son Waldo died in his youth as scarlet fever in 1842. The sun went up the morning sky, and with all this light, the landscape was dishonored by this loss, for this morning, a whose remembrance I have both slept and awaked, so often decorated for me morning star beating the cloud. Roy Earth, lilies, were brave and even majestic, perfect, gentle. Every treasure that ever tramped is abroad. He gave up his little innocent breath for sorrow. Makes us all children. Stories, all differences in the world. Rises. Let us enter together into the silence. How fragile life is. Indeed. In the past year and a half, over 4 million human lives have been lost, many of them needlessly, to the COVID pandemic. The dilemma of that loss has been right there in our faces. Slavery has subsided in American communities a bit, and once again venturing out. But the dilemma persists here and in much of the rest of the world. Death and the loss of friends and family from our lives is always difficult. The pandemic has obviously made these and all kinds of loss even more acutely felt. In no small part, this is due to our inability to process these losses in a normal fashion, whether they were caused by the COVID. 4 members of this church community are known to have been lost to a story. And their names are Candy Gale, Kathy Norman, Patricia McCracken, and Roger Paulson. I don't know whether COVID played a role in any of these losses, but the pandemic certainly made it difficult for others to process these deaths and raise their meaning to us as Unitarian persons. It's a dilemma that sadly persists. We seek to honor those who passed in order to keep their memories alive. We want them to live on, at least in our hearts. And so let us now offer up a moment of silence and say goodbye to Kay, Kathy, Patricia, and Roger, so that those who knew them, knew them well, can hold them close. I've been thinking that it's time to sermonize about life and death and loss as we emerge from the darkness. It may be helpful to us all as we seek to renew our sense of community. And so that is my theme today. Let me begin with a story from the Qing dynasty in China many centuries ago. Ina and I met in Washington, D.C. to see the exhibit of the Chinese terracotta soldiers in the National Geographic Museum. This was about a dozen years ago, before we were married. They came away with this little guy, this little statue, a small replica of one of the terracotta soldiers that protected the emperor and his burial ground. Buried phalanxes of these figures, each of them life-size and unique, fanned out around the emperor's burial plot. The Qing dynasty emperor ordered the manufacture of those thousands of terracotta soldiers to support his political ambitions in his anticipated afterlife. Clearly, he believed he would need them and their military might in that afterlife. It was presumptuous of him to assume he would reincarnate as a powerful emperor, and his warriors would come to life. But that's apparently what it is. I believe most of us would like to think that we somehow live on after death and that things will be better in that afterlife. Perhaps perhaps we won't suffer as we do this month. Such hopes seem to have been ubiquitous in the ancient world, and archaeological evidence shows that those in power made sure they were well provisioned for their journey and or return. That somehow we live on after death continues to prevail as a belief in one form or another. Our deaths. Perhaps no fear of the unknown and hope for the future conspire to lift up such an hour. Our bodies return to the earth, but our souls, what then embody, nonetheless, travel to some divine place, a place free of pain and suffering. Or we return to this world embodied as someone else or something else. Perhaps our spirits enter some alternative dimension or state that we continue our being on some other ineffable plane of existence. We very much want there to be something beyond life in this world as we know. Otherwise, death seems so final. Life ultimately hopeless on a personal level. We seem to welcome various doctrines of duality, the separability of body, spirit, in order to be hopeful of something after death. After all, when we experience other types of loss, life goes on. We breathe, and we move ahead with our lives. We lose our children when they mature and go out on their own. We lose jobs, marriages end, friends move away. We grieve all these losses, not to mention the deaths of family members and others dear to us, but our lives go on. And we come to terms with our sorrow. Why shouldn't our own lives go on? That we may somehow survive our own deaths. It's compelling. However, there are various doctrines of afterlife, of course, and some of them lead to absurdities. Consider this anecdote told by former UUA President William Schultz in his words. According to Order Number 5 from the State Religious Affairs Bureau of China, issued in August of 2007, any Tibetan Buddhist Lama, that is priest or monk, who is intending to reincarnate after death, must complete an application and submit it to 4 government agencies for prior approval. Should any Lama appear in reincarnated form without government permission, he would be immediately arrested. You've got to love the Chinese government. Schultz goes on to say, now, I don't know a lot about Buddhist notions of reincarnation. Though I do know that after a Lama has died, the way he knows he is destined to return to life is that he becomes a spectator of what one scholar called a panorama of gorgeous hallucinatory visions. Like a wonder-struck child watching moving pictures on the screen. Sort of, I guess, like many of us felt watching Walt Disney's Fantasia while stoned 40 years ago. That's Schultz's simile, not mine. In truth, death and loss are serious matters. Our humanity must get heavy and serious. We also know that on many levels, humor becomes a powerful coping mechanism. However, humor is not the only way to face death and loss. Or is it universally appropriate? For those of us who truly care about the inherent worth and dignity of every person, we may see humor as less than dignified. It would all be so much simpler if there were a Unitarian Universalist doctrine that was. Calvinists have a doctrine. You're saved if you're among the elect, those pre-selected by God for salvation. But since you don't know a priori anything about your salvation, you need to live a pious life. Because you just never know whether God may have already consigned you to the eternal fires. Other traditions have salvation algorithms. Just follow these 5 steps, and you shall be among the 144,000 who experience the rapture. No matter that this seems to set a finite limit on heaven's capacity to accommodate souls. We UUs are skeptical of such doctrines, so we reject them entirely. All that we have is the universalist belief that no loving God could possibly consign most souls to normal, eternal flame, and that if anyone is saved, all are saved. This is more anti-Calvinist in terms of belief than a doctrine of death or loss. Yet we still want there to be something for us after death, something that keeps us spiritually alive after we are gone. We view death in different ways depending on the nature of death. Indeed, the story of death, who they were, how many times, is often significant to us. And the type of death helps us to understand meaning. The stories of mourners to survivors themselves go on in search of an ending, as all stories seem to do. First, consider with many forms of cancer, for example. The protracted nature of such a death leaves survivors often feeling abandoned, helpless in the face of the illness, and even angry toward caregivers who cannot cure the disease. Another type of sudden death, as in a terrible accident or even in a wanton act of violence. Those who may have caused the incident are vilified, deservedly so or not. Authorities struggle to assign blame. Politicians pretend to want to do something about it. Yet grief among survivors comes in waves, disorientation, confusion, life's injustices, foaming anger, often focus. A related type is the untimely death, as when a child or an adult is lost suddenly. Or even when some older adults who seem to have much living left to do passes suddenly, as it was with my own father back in 1986. Sadness is powerful. You may feel anger at God, life itself, for the lack of justice. Of course, there is timely death, death attributed to old age, perhaps. Our bodies begin to deteriorate. Lives become less livable with that, as it was with my mother in 2013. We can sometimes find an emotional acceptance in such a death, but our anxiety over the loss does not melt away. Finally, there is the sought-after death, what we call suicide. This trauma almost always amplifies the emotions that accompany other types of death. Very nature of the sought-after death promotes reactions of guilt. We should have seen this coming. This may be true. Note that suicide without warning is rare. The guilt easily takes the form of self-blame. Anger at the deceased is natural, as the sought-after death may have been intended as a blow to family, one that cannot be returned. There is often a sense of shame at immediate family members see the stigma of perceived family disgrace. However, we must remember that a sought-after death is a decision of the individual. A wise person said this: suicide is an act completed in solitude, and one person is responsible for it. I dare say that all of us have experienced the emotional roller coaster company's loss, no matter which of these types of death you may reflecting on our emotional responses does not by itself mitigate them. Many people are comforted by the notion, often doctrinized, that somehow our lost loved one continues their existence. She has gone to a better place. He has found peace. We humans grieve, just as each of us here today will be grieved at some point in time. Here we are, as Unitarian Universalists, with no doctrine of death. How shall we deal with all of this? To paraphrase the late Forest Church, how shall we deal with the simultaneous knowledge that even as we live, so must we die? As Unitarian Universalists with no doctrine of death, justification, or an afterlife, each of us is free to believe that death is absolute, radical, irreversible end of life, or to believe something else, that we do enjoy some sort of duality, that our spirits somehow exist beyond our incarnated beings. Many Unitarian Universalists, if not most, understand that any afterlife is made real here, in this life, within the hearts of those who survive us. Someone recently reminded me that we don't have the leverage of promised salvation if we behave. Such leverage, we all know, used to keep people in line with other traditions, orthodoxies. With no such orthodoxy, we use have very little spiritual leverage. And so we Unitarian Universalists face an abiding dilemma in terms of how we face that loss. Do we venture into perhaps more satisfying belief in the supernatural? Or do we constrain ourselves to the natural finality of death and hope to be remembered as people who loved? How shall we be immortalized? Of course, there are no definitive, rational answers to this dilemma. Thus, we may begin to wonder, why bother with religion? How can religion, or at least our UU brand of it, comfort us? For an answer, I turn to Shakespeare's Macbeth, Act 4. A messenger finds Macduff and Malcolm in deep conversation. Messenger solves, but finally comes around to share the bad news that Macbeth has seen to the murder of Macduff's wife and children. Macduff is unbelieving, devastated. Malcolm says to him, "Merciful heaven, what man dare hold your head upon your brows? Give sorrow words. The grief that does not speak whispers the forefront part that bids it well. Malcolm later encourages Macduff to respond to his grief with anger and retribution against Macbeth. Now, we as UUs ought not follow that lead, but what about giving sorrow words so that we need not break our hearts? What does this mean, to give sorrow words? UU theologian William Murray says, we let our grief out with others who will hear us. This is one of the most important ways of its service, in which we recover from loss and the devastating emotions of grief. Indeed, grieving loss is painful work. The road is long and suffering is great. It's not just the loss of friends and family that has challenged us. What we have lost to the pandemic, to the radical disruption of our lives, is an object of grief too. But fear not, for we do not have to bear our grief alone. For Unitarian Universalists, the dilemma of death and loss finds an answer in religious community. The community needs to listen. That happens to be something we strive to do in our congregations. Our Unitarian Universalist answers lie not in doctrine, but in the celebration of community. As Shakespeare warns, the grief that does not speak whispers the o'erfraught heart and bids it break. Let us commit to be there to listen to one another, to hear the words of sorrow, grief that does speak. Therefore, be silent. I wanted to close with some music as well. And I think everybody knows Spirit of Love. Spirit of Love, come to me, sleep in my heart, oh, Spirit of compassion. Oh, in the wind, rising the sea, giving light, shape of justice, roots for me flow, wings set me free. Spirit of God, come to me, come to me. It's been a long time since we've done that. It's pretty good. That happened once when I was doing a pre-candidating sermon at the congregation at Chuck Ramos. I couldn't find the order of service, so I skipped the offertory. They didn't like that. I don't know. I'd like to share it's an old closing that I learned back when I was in Unitarian. I was only Unitarian at the time. RE, back you come up and extinguish the chalice for me? That's a change, so he wasn't expecting that. But it's just, you know, it's going pretty good over there, and I'm not sure I got a lot of work on those campus numbers, so. As we go from here, make peace, love in our hearts, understanding in our minds, make courage, steel our wills, and the love of truth forever guide us. Amen. Let us go, peace.